Hi, good morning, guys. Yeah, Sunday and quite a interesting week politically that we have seen, and especially relating to, once again, various threats and declarations of war and a lot of boo around the character of Julius Malema. Okay. And the constant question always coming up is, Skulk, what do we do about Malema? Where do we stand with him? Is he strong enough to really be a threat to us? How should we counter him? All these questions always coming up. Okay, let's start at the beginning so that everybody is on the same page relating to this character, Malema, because he's a character. Malema used to be the ANC Youth League president. During the time of Zuma, he became quite vocal. He became quite popular. He was taken to court at one stage by a certain civil rights group who later on settled the case with him. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about that whole episode. It's not necessary to repeat today what happened during that time. Due to so-called internal squabbles in the ANC, and this is what the mainstream media is telling us, Malema then went out of the ANC and he created his own organization called the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters. And because he held that political freedom was maybe gained in 1994 by the black population of South Africa, but economic freedom was never gained. They were still slaves in the eyes of Malema. Okay, that's the mainstream media story. People more clued up about politics will know that if you look at communist revolution and how communist revolution is precipitated in countries, you will always have a bigger group, the mainstream communist group, which usually portrays itself as soft and good and approachable, and then you have a fringe group that's very extremist in its ways, and between the two of them, they play good cop, bad cop, and eventually the diversionary smaller force takes precedence and they carry through the revolution. Not necessarily in the end to govern the country or govern the territory where they were involved, just simply as the advance guard of the revolution. That is how communist revolutions work. Well, how do we know this? Because it's been played out in real time and in real terms across the world over and over and over again the past century or so. And we all, of course, we sit with the handbook, many handbooks on communism. Most important one's Das Kapital, and then please go and read Stalin's own writings and Lenin's own writings on the issue of communism. Especially relating to what he calls dialectical materialism. He doesn't call it communism, he calls it a little something else. Okay, so what am I actually saying to you? I'm actually saying to you that left wing, right wing, same bird. And sometimes in the left wing, as in the right wing, that wing is made up of feathers. And Julius Malema and the EFFF is just another feather in the left wing. Right, so don't see Malema and what he's doing in isolation. It's part of a much grander scheme. It's part of a much grander plan that is being played out and have been played out and flopped 2 or 3 times previously. Because sane and rational people from all colors and all backgrounds came together or stood against what was going on. Okay. The ANC at this point in time is once again at the so-called tipping point where one of the 2 factions or 3 factions or 4 factions or 10 factions, it doesn't matter, it goes about the distribution of money, it has nothing to do with politics. You know my views on the ANC as an organized crime unit, a mafia, not a political party. So all the squabbling is going on inside the ANC is not about politics or the benefit of the country or anything to relating to that. It's simply who's the main man who hands out the parcels. Nee, dis soos die manpakkies. Let me not go there for this video. So it's about the head boy, the head man, the in the La Cosa Nostra, they would call him the boss, the boss of bosses, capo di capi, who sits at the top and who distributes the different work, the different extortions, how the money flows, who's paid what. It goes about that, nothing else. Okay, Malema himself, black folk of South Africa especially, do not see Malema as a savior, as a common working class man standing up for your rights. He showed himself over and over and over and over again as to be exactly the opposite. His schools, his kids go to private so-called white schools. He himself wears the best European outfits by the best designers. He wears the most expensive Swiss watches. He drinks the most expensive French champagnes. I can go on. The list just simply never stops. When he arrives in big black, very luxurious German vehicles that me and you, ordinary people on the street, can't afford. Okay, so all these things tell you that we're dealing with a faux communist or liberating leader, especially now listening to me, black folk, on the issue. To white folk, because the white minority in South Africa and also the Indian minority in South Africa is seen to be the rich people, those that benefited from the system previously, although you find that ordinary white people in South Africa today are much worse off than they've ever been previously in the history of South Africa, except, and here's the exception, the time after the Boer Wars, right? And that is significant because we moved from a place of the arm blanke problem, the poor white problem, into a phase where we actually became economically liberated to a certain extent, and then we just simply fell back into slavery, because what happens today is nothing else but slavery. You receive a little salary, you pay your home loan, you pay your car loan, you pay your telephones, and you have a little pittance over to buy food, if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you don't even have that. But let's leave that aside. We're dealing with Malema. Every time that the ANC comes at that squabbling point, that internal squabbling point of who is going to be the capo di capi, the boss of bosses, then the diversion is thrown at the edge, and that is Malema and the EFF. And they would go out and they would start bashing the so-called bad guys, the white minority, and especially also now these days, the Indian minority, as a pure diversion of what is actually and really going on. Okay, we've seen ample proof over many years of how Malema is paid by what he calls white minority capital, which is actually not white. But we will leave that also for another day's video. Okay? Otherwise, Facebook is going to take me off permanently. He's being paid to do what he is doing, and he's agitating the minority group. He can't go out and start bashing the Zulus, for instance, because that will cause civil war in 24 hours from now. He can't go out and bash other black groupings. So he goes and he bashes the small white minority, especially, and these days it seems also the Indian community. Why? Because we're stupid enough to fall for that time and time again. And unfortunately, we're sitting with our own provocateurs and our own stupid people falling for the provocation and the attacks, the verbal attacks from Malema, and then inciting our own people to respond. So all of a sudden you have a new dynamic on the side, which divert attention away from what is actually going on, and the squabble inside the ANC relating to who is now the boss of this criminal organization. That's all that's going on, folks. That's all that's going on. If you see Malema going mad on TV and sending voice notes and sending threats and declaring war against white people, I do not say it's not a threat, and I do not lessen the threat to South Africa as a whole, and I will come back to that in a moment. All that I'm just saying is don't see it as something isolated. It's part of a much grander scheme. It's a diversion to take your eyes and your attention away from what is actually going on. Okay, that's all that's happening. The small little clowns, Hofmeyer of the world, and the Barnards of the world, and that clown from UIM that's gone all quiet now, certain white leaders, as I said, either being agents of states, agents provocateur themselves, or just simply too stupid, or trying to cash in on the whole thing, will drive people to fear, and fear causes what? Reaction in the form of sometimes even the possibility of violence. Do not fall for those people either. The vast majority of people in South Africa, white, black, colored, Asian, and all the others, are living in South Africa in a peaceful manner. Yes, we do see elements of the population, and let's be honest about this, mostly from the black community, standing up and going into the streets and destroying. Yes, we're sitting with a very concerted effort to drive white farmers, especially white farmers, from the land through farm attacks and farm murders. And I can go on with the whole issue of race and crime and genocide and all these things that has become part of the whole South African scene over decades. I know of these things firsthand because I've always been involved in countering, in fighting the bad guys who's bringing this to this country of ours. You will never see me inciting one race against the other. Because here, and I said I wanted to come back to this, if we precipitate, if we start a civil war, and especially a civil war based on tribes or on colors, races in South Africa, we will have not a fallen state as we have now. We will have the biggest quagmire of shit that you will ever encounter in your life. If you think the Second World War and what happened there was bad, or what the communists did when they took over most of Asia and Southeast Asia was bad, and look what happened there. It will be in South Africa, but on a tremendous scale. We're sitting with a white population of about 4.2 million now. We're not 5 million, don't believe that. We're about 4.2 million. And we're sitting with a black population that at this point in time, we don't know how big that population is. Statistics, South Africa tells us there's about 60 million people in South Africa. Everything else tells us there's a whole lot more than 60 million people in South Africa. We're sitting with the influx of people from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, and especially from Nigeria, to the extent that we don't know how many of those people are here. It's impossible for us to even go and calculate. There's whole areas in South Africa, whole suburbs being controlled by Nigerian gangs. There's whole levels of organized crime being controlled by Zimbabweans. And I'm not being now anti-foreigner, I'm just simply stating facts here. We know all these things. In all racial groups, and all the colors and all backgrounds, you will find good people and bad people, right? So it's not singling out people, it's just simply stating facts. It's creating a bottom line from where we understand things. How do we deal with Malema then? Okay, at the height of Malema's revolutionary tide, the golf that he created, that wave, you will remember that they had a march in Sandton. It was called the 500,000 EFF march. It was never 500,000 people. There were not 500,000 people on the streets. We know that because ourselves, myself, many other people, very include up, looked at the actual aerial photography that went on, and we counted. And to count crowds, it's easy. You block it off in a certain area, and you know how big the area is vis-a-vis calculations. You count how many people is in that block. You look at how many people is in the bigger block, and you start doing the calculations. On those calculations, it was about 30,000 people. The next big event that they had was about 40,000 people in a given stadium, a soccer stadium, where about 40,000 of their members were together. The last big outing in aggression that Malema had was Senekal 2, where I have first-hand knowledge. I don't have to go and discuss that once again. But that was the last time that the EFF came out in numbers in anger. I'm not speaking of these little school things where 5 members of the EFF turns up and 10 members turn up. Those are not outings by EFF in numbers. It's calculated that Senekal 2 that between 5,000 to 7,000 EFF fighters, some of them really not fighters, only elderly women with red t-shirts dancing around, but also a contingent of really, how can I put it, possible soldiers were on the ground at Senekal 2. Senekal 2, excuse my Afrikaans in describing it. Between 5,000 to 7,000. I would rather believe the smaller number, although Reuters, the international media house, speaks of 7,000. They were stopped on the ground. Kali and Dani and you guys who were there, Dogs of War, you were there. We were about 200 people at most inside the town of Senekal, and of the 200, many people were praying, many people were there, I would say passively. There was at the very end about 50 people who blocked off roads and stood their ground there. 50 Boers stopped supposedly 7,000 EFF fighters. Okay, that was the last time out, and I think the reason it was the last time out was because Malema at that point realized that they will have opposition, and he's going to end up with egg in his face every time. Because if 50 Boers on the street in a little dusty town in the Free State can stop 7,000 of his fighters of going into that town and burning down the town, then what will happen if 1,000 Boers all of a sudden turns up at a given point? Okay. I'm not inciting violence. I'm also not challenging the EFF. I'm doing exactly the opposite. I'm saying to the citizen out there, white, black, colored, Indian, everybody, from here on in, do not take too much notice or heed too much on what Malema is saying. Keep him in the eye, because he can become like a rabid dog. Hy kan soos dol om te kere gaan and he can cause trouble. But don't be diverted by what he's doing from what is actually going on. Okay. The real fight is actually inside the judiciary of South Africa today. It's not even inside the ANC. But I will do a totally new video on that subject maybe later on in the coming week. Okay. What you must do as a citizen, start, if you haven't done it yet, start WhatsApp groups for your area, for your town, for your street. Come into contact with all the people around you so that you know what is going on in your immediate, direct area. Then, those groups, please, in an organized fashion, go to your community policing services, go to your local police, and become part of those structures. But only to the extent that you're not controlled by them, you're not pacified by them, you're not part of the bad guys. You just simply become part of those groups to be within the bounds of law, so that they can't come later on. Like the Paris case many years ago, Antoinette, you will remember what I'm speaking about now, where good people chased down a farm murder, and that caused them a huge amount of problems. So much so that even years later, people were still sitting in prison awaiting trial. So join up with community policing services and forces and groups, but under the protection with the assistance of SAPS itself. We don't have the old commando systems anymore. There was a reason why it was disbanded, because it gave a military strike power to the citizens of South Africa. And that is why Terror Lekota, he will always be to me Terror Lekota. That's the reason why he had that name. He was minister at that point in time of defense. He disbanded the commandos under Mbeki. We know why that happened, so we don't have those structures anymore. If you want to become a part of the Boer commandos or the commandos on the ground, please ensure that all that you do is done within the bounds of law. Don't go sit around the rifleless fire and make plans of how you're going to overthrow the state and let the agents provocateur get you into that way of speaking and doing things. It's going to be a Boeremacht 2. Be clever how you approach this thing, but become very vigilant and very active and proactive, even inside your own house. If you can afford a firearm, go and buy one. Make sure that you have one. I know it's a very tedious and a very long and drawn out process. Please go and do that. If you don't have the means to do that, or it's impossible for you to do that, at least ensure that there is some kind of arms in your house. What do I mean by that? Something to hit or stab with. Make sure that's in your house. Be vigilant. If you have dogs, keep your dogs inside your house during the night. Don't let them roam outside, so that the thief and the burglar and the possible genocidal attacker is not in a position of killing your dogs even before you know the threat is there. Keep them in your house. Do things like that. Be proactive in how you approach life. We as South Africans have become so used to crime, and especially violent crime, that we have a gung-ho way of seeing these things. So what? And then the crime strikes you. And then it's very bad for you and your family. Okay. On the farms, farmers, please become part of farm watches or farmers unions. Organize yourself on a land. Make your living area, your living space for you and your farm workers to be a hedgehog. What do I mean by that? Make it as strong and defensible as possible. The moment that the threat is there, it can close down. That is what you're supposed to do. Be vigilant when you move around on farm roads. I can see in the Free State, where I travel a lot in the rural areas, that they have been putting up cameras everywhere. Excellent, guys, excellent. You're putting that level, that mat of surveillance already on the ground, so we know who moves where and when. But please be vigilant. But relating to Malema, his threats, his showing teeth, it's all just a ruse. Do not fall for it. Do not fall for Malema to be your main threat. Your main threat isn't Malema. It's a diversion from your main threat. It's a diversionary force. If you know a little bit about war and how you do the art of war, tactics in war, you'll always find small groups of skirmishers there far in front. They are there to recon, do the reconnaissance. They are there to prepare the way for the main army to come. But sometimes they are there as skirmishers to pick up little fights with the enemy and divert the attention of the officers and the soldiers in thinking they are fighting battles now, but actually it's only skirmishes where they would strike and pull back. But they take your attention away from the big army that's moving in your direction. Okay, so don't be fooled and don't be stupefied by what is going on in South Africa today. We are sitting at the point where this thing goes south. It's going to become uncontrollable. The police cannot stop it. We saw that last year in Natal. The army cannot stop it. We saw it last year in Natal. If there's a willingness inside the police or the army to stop it, I doubt. Therefore, it's going to come down once again to citizens out there. I wear my American hat again with this black flag, because we need the citizens, like in the United States, the citizens to start becoming proactive and arming themselves and being in a position that if the pawpaw hits the fan, like in Natal last year, and my thumbs up to those guys, within 24 to 48 hours we were closing down towns and we were closing down whole areas and securing them like never before. We saw a population stand up and saying, up to here, you do not go beyond this point, as we had in Senekal 2, on that specific road just across from Wimpy. We had 50 boers standing there and saying, you will not pass this point. Because we know that if you pass this point, you will incinerate, you will destroy, you will cause civil war. So you will not fight. You will not move beyond this point today. And that is what we need. Okay. I hope for this Sunday I'm not bringing bad news to you. I hope what I said here is seen in a positive way to make you act proactively, to be vigilant, to be ready for when action starts. But here's the main thing, and here's the most important thing. Do not become involved in squabbles and skirmishes with those that's actually only diverting you. Do you know what the left really look for? What they really want from the white minority in South Africa? They want 10 or 20 half-drunk, brandy drinking, little snot-nosed boere in their two-tones running into the street and making a mock and killing or maiming 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 black people, because that will be the spark to ignite this whole thing. And that is why I've been countering certain people over and over and over again, because they're too stupid. They want likes on Facebook. They want to be popular in social media, and therefore they try to exploit what is going on here, but they don't even understand the dynamics of what they are trying to exploit. So be very careful of being drawn into a fight that at this point in time we are not supposed to start. Here's the second very important thing. From the outside, the report will go out that 50 racist Boers went and they killed black people, and that is what caused the civil war in South Africa. Do you think the United States will come and help? Do you think Russia will come and help? Do you think the next power, Israel, will come and help? Forget about it. Forget about it. If you still harbor thoughts like that, and ambitions like that, and hopes like that, get it out of your mind. It will not happen. If a civil war starts today, we are on our own. We're here alone. Think about that before you do anything strange or silly. Okay. Thank you so much for your time on this glorious Sunday morning. I think it's still morning. Yes, just about. Thank you for giving me time again. Come into contact with me through my usual channels. Also utilize my newly formed page. It's about a month old or a couple of weeks old. Justice League Africa, where we discuss crime, and you have the opportunity to report where you have not been assisted, for instance, or cases of yours have been wiped under the rug. Please come into contact with me relating to that, so that we can move with thought and foresight and go and solve your problem, not make it bigger. Okay? Thank you so much. I salute you guys. And yes, maybe tonight Leonie and I will pop in again and say hi. But have a tremendous day. Signing off. Skalk vir Malema.